Okay, it's recording.
Okay, hello everyone again. This is our Dialogic Pedagogy podcast number 29. And the topic that won everybody's attention that we had put on Facebook is critical dialogue, sponsored by Kathy von Duke. I hope that she can join us too. I'm not sure that she will, but it would be very nice. So many people talk about critical thinking and want critical thinking in education, but this is critical dialogue. So what's the difference between critical thinking and critical dialogue?
Are you asking me or whom you asking?
I'm asking you, yes.
Okay, well, it's an interesting question. My kind of first answer, well, critical thinking is, first of all, idea that it's happened in the head of one person. And critical dialogue has happened as a dialogue. And one big consequence of that it's critical within dialogue, not within one person. And which means also that it's not localized anywhere. It's not localized both in space and time. So in a way, the criticality of this dialogue or examination is open for participants, different participants, and for people in time. And some people might start that critical dialogue, but it continues with other people. Like, for example, Plato, let's say, started some critical dialogue, which is he said that it's actually started with Socrates and some people with whom this dialogue happened, right? But in a way, it's going already for more than 2,000 years, some of these dialogues, and will continue. So this is where I see one big difference. That probably another big difference is, which is again, all of them related. It's like what the critical quality itself, because the critical means it's examination of the ideas against alternative ideas. So the possibility of bringing these alternative ideas coming from other people in other time and other contexts, it's kind of open. So in a way, critical dialogue, it's never as unfinalizable, because nobody knows what will happen in the future, who will bring things. So they're open in principle, which is critical thinking, not necessarily. And also the judgment, what does it mean, critical thinking? Or critical, what does it mean critical in a way? Or the quality of critical is also part of the dialogue and part of open. So it doesn't belong to any one person to define that, like what's critical, what's not critical, because it will be part of dialogue itself.
Yeah, so would you say that the critical definition of critical entails some kind of deconstruction?
Yes. From at least my point of view, which is not necessarily how, again, people in defining critical thinking would think. Some people define critical thinking from like some kind of repertoire of it should be abstract, it should be this, it should be that. But I kind of see more like critical in terms of the deconstruction rather than abstract thinking or something like that, or generalizations, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of deconstruction, including the deconstruction of the itself as a deconstruction. So deconstruction has this limits in itself, and it's self-reflexive as well. It's deconstruction. Oh, hi, Mark.
Hello. How are you?
Fine.
Good. Excellent.
Okay. Your sound actually a little bit better than yesterday.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
You're not in the car anymore.
No.
No. The car was excellent, actually.
Really?
That sentence next to your house. Yeah. So this is, I would agree that it's, I don't know what Ljubica, what do you think about what's critical for you? Is it deconstruction or not? how you would see that.
Ljubica.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I would like to listen to you, but I'm not so able to discuss. Please.
Okay. Yeah. Mark, Anna asked, is it critical equal deconstruction? What do you think about that?
Deconstruction.
Yeah, of ideas, of values, of positions, of...
Like, can you give an example, Eugene or Mark? Like, what does it really mean, critical? Like, it would be good to not be in the air, but just an example, maybe from some practice in education, like of a critical dialogue.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, is critical always involve deconstruction, or does it involve like, it's like a readiness to do that if necessary, but it doesn't necessarily require it. Does that make sense?
No. not for me. Well, say more. But it's not...
Well, I just mean that it's a stance or a expectation that one may do that. That, in other words, anything is testable, anything is potentially up for deconstruction or taking apart or analyzing or you know. So I guess that's just what I would say, is that anything is testable, anything is possible to deconstruct. That's the only thing I would change.
Mm-hmm. And this example, Anna, I can give you, I don't know, do you need example or not? Like, just like example, yesterday I was teaching a class, and the topic of the class that my students chose was unequal childhood. And I kind of, I thought that a book by Annette Leroux is very good. It's ethnography of, basically it's observations and interviews of the kids and their families, the parents and the kids who live in Baltimore, in urban areas, and I think some suburban areas as well, and just to learn about their childhood and abstracting kind of things about childhood. But we started our class with the students wanted to know what factor contributes to difficulties for some children in urban schools. And so I asked them, like, okay, what do you think the factors contribute? Like, turn the table around. They asked that question, but it's kind of interesting, like what they see the factors. And they list interesting factors like money, for example, or lack of money, basically, like poverty. Parents neglect, in the sense that parents do not help kids to do homework. This is one example of that. There is lack of kind of infrastructure resources, like lack of transportation. It's not necessarily money of the people, but infrastructure, a lack of internet, and so on and so forth. So this is for them was factors, right? So while we start reading, we were reading in class the book, some chapters in the book. The picture was emerging was quite different. Suddenly they realized that the culture of middle class culture versus in the United States versus working class and poor family culture is very different, and they start wondering why. And then another thing start emerging issue of the school bias, that the school was really attuned to the middle class culture in the United States and very much against working class, which is interesting because it's coming from there themselves, some of them on the mix of middle class and working class with domination of middle class. And they start analyzing their own upbringing and their own cultural views. Like, why is it they expect that the parents should help their students with, their kids with the homework? They think something that is very much part of the middle class culture, but not necessarily working class culture. And they start seeing that it's not about neglect. It's about difference in values, which is again, they start challenging, like, what this values coming from? Like, why is it working class focus on discipline, at the same time autonomy of the children, and there is a lot of hovering going on in middle class, and that hovering is part of the school itself, that adults constantly telling kids what to do, and that's not working class. So it's become really start deconstructing many things, their own childhood, their own values, the school values. It's become, and this it's in my view a part of the critical dialogue. And of course, somebody can say, well, there is a lot of things missing in that dialogue. Of course, because it's unfinalizable. Of course it is missing. And of course, that's interesting to look on other sides of these issues. Like, for example, we didn't discuss kind of a certain type of anti-intellectualism of working class culture. And so on and so forth. There are many things we didn't discuss. In this case, the critical dialogue is always limited in how critical it is. And that's part of the, and it's not necessarily minus, it's part of the nature of the critical dialogue that's always limited.
The way how I imagine many doors and windows into which you can go, but you cannot go into all of them all the time.
Not only that, certain things are impossible to go just because they're invisible. It's like that Bakhtin's joke, which is I really like, that the most important thing ancient Greeks didn't know about themselves, that they were Asian. You know, the fact that they're Asian, they cannot see it themselves. It's somebody else can comment. And that's part of the, for me, that joke is very good because it reflects that there are certain things in principle invisible for people. It's just, it's somebody else can bring that, but sometimes that somebody else doesn't exist now. And they only will later exist, and later can tell us that, wait a minute, guys, you know, you were so constrained or so closed for certain things. And unfortunately, we will not be alive to agree or disagree with that. And they will control the floor with us.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So it's not limited in terms of time, space.
Yeah.
Critical dialogue expands beyond the current moment into something which we might not even understand completely. But we take that approach, and we understand that as an ontological part of our ontological sense of what education means.
Yeah, or what critical dialogue also means.
Well, what critical dialogue means.
Yeah. And education and issue at hand, like for example, one of the interesting things that emerged from our yesterday critical dialogue, that the students get very excited. It's kind of recognizing their own deficit model. Like, for example, they look at the poor urban kids, which is kind of big, as deficits rather than something strength and admiration that they're bringing to schools. And they start getting really, that part of that class, they become really admire this working class and poor culture, which is also not good to some degree because it's a romanticization of that, way going too far on that side. But nevertheless, it's not bad in terms of, it's critical in terms of their previous position, which is critical position, which is was deficient. They see like, it's like basically working class kids is like middle class kids with a lot of absences or deficits, and suddenly they see no, they are not. They have a lot of interesting things. They're very attractive to them, like autonomy. They become so excited about that and so upset that their own childhood almost robbed from that. They start complaining, and it's interesting if they complain immediately. Not only about their childhood, but what's going on now. Like they start saying, we are young people in some of them 18, 19, 20. And one of the students said, you know what, I don't know how to arrange an appointment to a doctor because my mother doing it for me even now. And I tried to tell her not to do that. And she still doing that. And because of that, you know, I'm really has this anxiety because there are certain things I don't know how to do. And I know that by that time, by my age, I'm supposed to do that. But my parents constantly hovering over me. Like they arrange everything. They also tell about how much their life is not fulfilled now because they feel constant anxiety that they have to be busy because their parents kept them busy. And even experiencing that time when it's not filled with activities, for some of them, it's a kind of a dangerous thing. At the same time, they know that it's not good. It's not good. They kind of cannot relax and start thinking about what they really want. Because in a way, constantly past, their own past, constantly dominate over their life. Because all decisions about now made in the past. And especially they noticed about that our pedagogical regime in the class disrupts that, which makes them also anxious. Because suddenly they say, well, what are we going to learn today? And the expectation, wait a minute, we don't know what we're going to learn today? No, we don't. Like, there are some options possible, but we don't know. It's up to you. Up to me, I don't know what's like. I don't know. I'm just, for the first time, I'm facing that. And they actually, one of interesting discussion, this was second meeting, was two students brought to their big dilemmas for the class, which was, we need to put timing on each topic or theme that we're discussing. At the same time, they say it's a terrible idea. But we need to do that, but it's a terrible idea. And it was a really interesting class discussion. And in the context of our discussion of unequal childhoods, that was very helpful. And they brought, it's interesting, we started that class with discussion of this issue. And they bring that back as saying, wow, this is our middle class anxiety is coming out. We can, basically they cannot improvise because they constantly feel out by the activities from their own childhood on. That initially it was parents who were doing that. Now they're doing themselves. And there is no kind of moment for some of them to say, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Let's see. Let me see, look around and let me get in the flow and see what I will choose. So is it interesting? That's, for me, that's part of the critical dialogue. And it's very ontological. It's, you know, we're talking about a working class, but suddenly it becomes about them, which is they're not working class. But hearing and understanding working class children and parents help them suddenly to understand themselves better and their own parents and their own life. That, for me, a part of the critical deconstruction. But we're not sitting and say, well, let's deconstruct your life. No, it's about like living in the class and experiencing issues and experiencing pedagogical regime of the class that brings all of this in our view.
It seems like it can be, the approach that you're describing can be contrasted with a critical approach which brings a lens already made into the educational environment. Like, let's say, a Marxist lens, you know, where you look at everything from the point of view of you know, the battles between the proletariat and the, you know, and the ruling class, you know, this kind of, or even a lens of critical analysis of gender or race, what's called sometimes the critical approach, the, you know, critical race theory, where you come in already with a ready-made set of ideas and values and approaches, and then ask people to be critical of themselves, the society, and others through that lens. It seems to me like that's when most people talk about critical, and when most people probably think of critical dialogue, they're thinking of that type of thing, right?
Right. Also, that's a good point, Mark, you're making in terms of the tradition of the like critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire and stuff like that. Also, they think about critical as instrumental, like critical for liberation. for example, and so on and so forth. And in my vision of this critical dialogue is we don't know what will come out of that, and people can do whatever they want, and that critical deconstruction in a way, this has value in itself, not because it will be liberation at the end of the day or something. It's just interesting to do it. It's just for understanding, for deepening meaning, to make our life much more meaningful. Like the students feel, yes, it's true, they start feeling liberation, but what we're doing, it's not liberation. In a sense, this is the purpose of the class, to liberate them, I don't know even from what, right? It's about like helping them to go deeper understanding of their life, and the life not only on the personal level, on the bigger scale as well. And they're interested in that, and we're going to that from their pathway, because starting that class, I actually didn't know that we will discuss what we will discuss, like, because it was coming from the students, and I'm helping, of course, because as soon as I notice interesting ideas, I'm sometimes elevating that or bringing alternative ideas or asking them questions or noticing things that might be otherwise will be not noticed. Mm-hmm. So that's true. But again, nobody knows what it's coming from, and it's not instrumental in that sense.
No, it's very ontological, the way you describe that one. And I think the dialogic pedagogy, that feels probably much more authentic than if you have to use somebody's lens, like somebody tells you what are the good or bad values, and now you have to apply that to analyze other situations.
One interesting thing was about yesterday we experienced that, and this is part of the discussion about that. Some said, you know, this we need more structure. They said initially, and then at the same time they say we don't need more structure, which is interesting. And part of this, we need more structure. They said maybe at the end of class we need to summarize what we like, what we come to, and. It was very interesting how they reject that idea at the end of the second class. They say it's impossible to summarize actually what we didn't come to. We kind of, it's not about coming to, it's about opening vista. They were so excited that suddenly they start seeing life in different thing. It's differently. So it's about changing their eyes. It's impossible to summarize. There's nothing to summarize in that sense. And that's very interesting, and which is makes it different. One thing that I was thinking about, how different and similar critical dialogue versus dialectics, and I define dialectics not so much how like traditionally it's defined. I'm more thinking about Dmitry Nikulin. It's kind of ways of arriving to the truth, and in my view critical dialogue can be dialectics, no question about that. So something we can arrive to some kind of truth. But I was just thinking about yesterday class. It's not the goal was to arrive to the truth. The goal was just to explore things, and part of that, change lenses. To suddenly see something that you never saw before. Mm-hmm. Yes, after that you might go for truth or something else. It's up to you. But it's actually very exciting to suddenly see different lenses. Something you see things. You're looking at the same things, but now with completely different eyes. And you see different, and this is what my students were yesterday, will get so excited at the end of the class, because they look at the thing. It's not they learn something new in that sense that there's new information come to them.
It's just
the same lenses. They suddenly see, they saw that it was in their very eyes, but they couldn't see that, or they saw it very differently. Like example, they saw parents neglect, and when they don't help kids with their homework, and suddenly they saw, no, it's not that. Maybe it is also it could be different things. It could be cultural values behind that, and these cultural values rooted in autonomy, which is extremely attractive to them. And they start thinking, wait a minute, maybe helping kids with the homework is not a good idea. maybe the homework idea is not a good idea at all. I mean, they get so excited about this. Wow. By the way, they are not coming to conclusion that homework is bad or good. Not yet. But at least now it's in their kind of
possibility that they can open up. They can
yes,
start
and they're very excited about that and very contradictory to themselves because there are many different values now fighting in them, which that fight was not there before the class started. But now they're very excited because like it's almost like they're like a kid in the toy store. Like I want everything from that. Now because there are so many things we can now think differently. And in my view, that's part of this critical dialogue. So it's not necessarily about that searching for truth, something like that.
So I just want to bring a little bit from other people's understanding of critical dialogue. And let's say Rupert Vegeriff, he talks about dialogic space, opening dialogic space. And he tries to define dialogue, educational dialogue, that would be productive educational dialogue, in which I think he doesn't mean just what he cooling things of being together without any purpose. And that would mean, in a way, potentially critical, although I don't think Rupert uses it. But he talks in terms of space. And I think that what you said before, that really critical dialogue is beyond space and time, is much more exciting for me to think in those terms, because space is limiting. Still is kind of trying to put in some kind of like structure and to provide some limits. And the critical dialogue really does not have limits. It can happen or not happen, but it doesn't have limits.
And in my view, essentially, and this is what I also respectfully disagree with Rupert, critical dialogue is not productive. Can be byproductive, something like comes out, but it's not, we're not working on something. Like, this is what part of this excitement as well as frustration for my students, because we're constantly talking about different things. We're not following one line to the end. There's no end, like, and shift. And on one hand, it's very frustrating for them because it is like, it's not productive. We're not in activity mode. Yes. You know, there is no goal. Like, what's the goal? I don't know what's the goal. What we're trying to do? I don't know what we're trying to do. But that's on one hand. On another hand, they're extremely excited because it's that's why they cannot, they don't, not only they cannot, they don't want to summarize it. Because they start feeling that summarizing, which is exactly productivity of that, feels the spirit of what we're doing.
Yes, exactly.
And the fact, the students like, absolutely, in this case, it is what Nikulin talks about on certain level, that we just being together in the sense like people come with this ideas like, wow, they start talking about their own childhood. And initially they were talking about like, you know, I'm not sure it's relevant. And they, at some point they drop that because they see, by the way, when they say that, it means we're changing direction. Yeah, and that's why they can almost apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Yeah, but at the same time, they start seeing that since we're not going to, so there is no, in that, it is interruption, but it's very helpful interruption because they start, like, for example, in the middle, they start saying, wow, I suddenly realized that my mother and father belong to different culture. That's why there is constantly fight among them. And which was always interesting for me, like what it was coming from. So like my father coming from working class background, and nowadays, and I knew that all the time. How can I didn't see that? That's another question become. And my mother from middle class, and all of this constantly fights about values coming from that. And it's in my face, and I didn't connect the dots. And I now start thinking, aha, this is how I start oriented. Because sometimes I like what my mother said, and sometimes what my father said, but I now said, I'm shopping in these two cultures, and they're incompatible with each other. And is it become another question? How can I shop that? Because they're trying to not allow this kind of bifurcations or dualisms or whatever. coexistence because they're so powerful in themselves. So it was interesting. But for me, it's not about productivity.
Yeah, that's a serious issue because I think our society has this tendency, we think that we're learning something only when we learn a concept or some kind of intellectual, or at least a lot of middle-class teachers think that way, right? Like I remember in my dissertation, was this beautiful discussion that kids were having, middle school kids were having about the complex interrelationships that were going on in their little micro society in their school, where one kid was saying something negative to another kid and creating, like, for example, this kid was constantly getting angry at other kids, and it was making other kids upset. And he walked in, he would go on the playground and he would, he was an angry guy. He had some anger issues, and a lot of us do, right? But this kind of set him off against the others. And, and other kids were telling him, one kid told him, when you do that kind of stuff, it doesn't make me feel good, right? And it was interesting because the kids were we have to remember, of course, when we deal with issues like this, and this might be one of the reasons why teachers want to run the other way, is it gets emotional. People start feeling feelings, they start crying, they start yelling, and nobody knows where things are going to go. There's no end point. You don't know if kids are going to start yelling at each other, screaming at each other, causing conflict and whatever. And so it's comfortable for many of us, teachers, adults, whatever. I'm just thinking about the middle school context. There's a place where you got all sorts of issues. You don't know where things are going to go. A lot of teachers will be very comfortable saying, well, this is a good opportunity to talk about bullying. And I remember when I was watching this whole event going, bullying? What the hell does this have to do with bullying? And by the way, I even had some data showing the kids were getting together in a group afterwards when they were asked to talk about bullying. And that's exactly what the kid said. The kid that brought up the whole discussion was like, bullying? What are we talking about? What the heck does this have to do with bullying? They were confused. But I think there's a natural tendency when we're talking about these kinds of issues, especially when things get kind of emotional, for there to be something to learn from this. And you wonder if that's because there's this desire on the part of many well-meaning educators, one, to find something to learn because they believe that that's important. That would be like an abstract universal, a Kantian notion that there's something you can take out of everything. Or two, if it's just simply an attempt, unconscious most of the time, I would assume, to block the ontological dialogue, because in that very sense, you don't know where that's going to go. And you feel that if you allow that to continue, it's going to spiral into a place where all of a sudden people are talking about their home life, they're talking about their parents, yelling at each other, they're talking about they're making kids cry, they're talking about maybe the fact that somebody has a parent in their home that drinks, and blah blah blah. You don't know where this is going to go, and you don't know to what degree so and so might have, we've created a situation of safety, which is blocking us from having these kind of discussions. And critical dialogue is not the kind of sanitized reality that maybe a lot of people want to have. It requires us to actually sit with discomfort, to sit with, and on the part of, I think, both students and teachers. A lot of people don't want to go there, right? They don't want to sit with discomfort. And it's rare, I think, for people to want to do that. I think, and I don't know, when you're teaching I'm talking to all of you here, whether you face that issue of discomfort, whether you face the issue of, oh my God, I don't want to go there, what are the risks involved in that, and also the challenges, and also how to handle the situation in such a way that you create the culture that values that, regardless of how it feels. If that question makes sense.
It does. I think the more ontological the critical dialogue becomes, there is an emotional area there, and the risk of somebody really experiencing torpedo touches, as
Mm-hmm.
you say, because it starts to actually shatter whatever the rug under their feet, and it could be dangerous for some reason. I had such examples in my teaching, and Eugene had such examples too. And the question is, I think, mostly to give, if possible, the student a way out if they want to stop, if they can stop. I don't know. I don't know how to say that. Yeah, I remember in some trying to see whether sometimes, emotions are good because they bring a change, they bring a transformation. It makes something meaningful happening in their lives. I wouldn't stop them for sure. And when it becomes dangerous, then I guess you have to stop critical dialogue and try to help a person not break. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it involves many. Mark, first of all, it's a terrific topic and terrific issue that you're bringing, in my view. Very, very important. And I think this, in general, I agree with you that critical dialogue is in many ways both exciting and very frustrating and not very comfortable, especially if you're going to the...
Not always. From time to time, it could be like that.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, in general, altogether, if you take this all emotional spectrum, and I think, and part of that is because it's eventful. It creates events, and events, of course, when there is high intensity of events, this is where these emotions become very strong, and there are fights would be possible there. By the way, on an opposite side, it could be absolutely euphoric thing. Exactly. Like I would say, yesterday I saw a much more like euphoric event. It was not very discomfortable, although I don't know about that because I can clearly also see both excitement as well as almost like a fear in the students, not a fear of me but a fear of what it's almost like it's a kind of biblical event of eating this apple. And it's not somebody forced them to eat the apple, they want to eat apple, but at the same time, wow, with eating this apple or from the knowledge tree or whatever you can call that, from critical dialogue, better to say, you suddenly see things differently, and you have different emotions now, and you have different like your commitments start collapsing, the previous commitments start collapsing, and the new one is not developing yet, and you find it a little bit in limbo on many issues, like about like what's good or what's bad, suddenly things. Also, that student talk about their fights of her parents, and now her almost like alliances start collapsing. Like she had a rather stable view of these fights. How she will align, with whom she will align. And now she started kind of challenging all with herself, like, wow, should I actually align with my mother just because all of these middle class things, or should I understand more my father now rather than, like before I was thinking that it feels like nonsense what's coming from her. And now I feel like, it actually makes sense, and actually it's very exciting. And in past I liked something and I kind of dismissed that. And now I think actually a second look on that. So the whole family relations might change because of that. And so, but I kind of like Mark that it's a part of that is very interesting. It's a culture behind that, right? At the same time, critical dialogue likes to deconstruct that culture as well. So in a way, critical dialogue almost like always aims undermining itself in part, because it's whatever promotes it, it's also can be on its way.
Dangerous too. But
Yeah.
remember also from the article about idea dying topic of suicide in education, how that student who suggested that topic finally ended up not being able to discuss anything because she started experiencing very strong emotions about somebody's suicide in her life. And so it breaks for her, the dialogue breaks at that moment.
No, it's not breaks. She actually, this is my case. It's not, she's not breaks. She's intentionally wanted to start critical dialogue, but without her. Yes. And it's not breaks. That's her design. Yeah. That's something for us. She proposed topic. At the same time, she emailed me that she will not come to the class. Because not actually she experienced somebody's her suicide, that she doesn't want to revisit that, and it's very traumatic. But at the same time, she thinks it's super important for teachers to be educated about. So it's not like something was breaking. That was her design, which is in a way very paradoxical design. Like to start something, to provoke things, but doesn't want to be a participant of that, at least at that time.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more about other cases, much more dramatic that, Mark, you're talking about. I had, for example, a class when I was teaching undergraduate class with, there was Native American nationalist there, or maybe I would say racist, who was calling for like cleansing Americas from white people, and very tough. And at some point, by the way, for some strange reason, he was very good with me. I don't understand why exactly, being white. Somehow he was very, very somehow I was exception from the whole thing. Anyway, but at some point I want to expel him from the class because of my concern about other students. Like, for example, one student, at that time, for me, she would look like very old, which is she was early 50s. And she was telling about certain kind of things. She talked about her daughter committing suicide, but fortunately she survived. It's about relevant within our discussion. And so, and he just comment, it's too bad that she survived, something like that. And after that, I thought, that's it. And what's interesting is that all other students, including her, asked me to keep him in class. They thought it's important was for their critical dialogue. And they say, it's tough for us to listen to him, but important. And we understand like your concerns, but since you're concerned about us, we're okay. And we're okay, not in terms of okay, completely okay, but we can handle that. You don't need to. So in this case, I said, okay. By the way, we did that very publicly, including him. He heard everything. Like, it's not like we talked behind his back. We were just included and discussed that, and I said, like, that's it. I cannot. That's because he crossed the line, and so I wanted to expel him. But they said, no, let's keep him, and we managed to keep them. But I'm just saying that it can be very, very, very tough at some points. And on another hand, I kind of also sympathize to them and their idea to keep him, because where else are we discussing this issue but not in education? Like, I have homophobic students who were openly express their ideas, homophobic ideas, and I'm pretty sure I have some gay students in my class. But that is, again, where we can have this discussion but not in education. Yeah. Where is that forum when we can deconstruct these ideas? Mm-hmm. And it's painful, I know. And also there is limit how much each person can tolerate. And another part of that, conventional education, which is I'm part of that institutionalized conventional, it's also, it's not free. People cannot freely move away from each other. You, in a way, forced to be there. And so that has to be taken into account as well.
Maybe critical dialogue is less emotional, but I wouldn't say always. When the topics are more like abstract topics of the curriculum, like scientific topics, physics or chemistry.
I don't know about that. I don't know. It's actually not necessarily true. It's actually, people can become very, very emotional about things that look like, for other people, they look very abstract. It's the abstractness in the eye of the beholder.
Right, like opening up Latour's black box is what it makes me think of. You know, the minute you open up that box, there's all sorts of debates and whole careers that are on the line if you open it up, and it's not exactly, it's not for the foolhardy to do something like that. And you know, he talks about the risks involved in that, in opening up these boxes. So. Yeah, sometimes I feel like now, you know, I guess there's another issue that comes to my mind, and I heard this from students in the past. Sometimes they don't feel equipped to address the issues. You know, they feel like, well, I don't know enough. I mean, this is something that, you know, so I would rather follow the book, so to speak, then open up discussions where I don't know where things are going to go because I don't have enough comfort or just to discuss the topics. And sometimes I feel like there's this issue with critical dialogue where I think a lot of teachers will shy from engaging in it simply because they believe that the dialogue or discussion will go somewhere where they don't know anything. Mm-hmm. And there's this huge fear of the unknown, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure. And in my view, and this is always the question for me, is can education be truly dialogic? And part of that is how much teacher can be really engaged in critical dialogue. And precondition for that, it's exactly the issue are open for the teacher as well. And in a way, what you're talking about, that conventional teacher struggling with one thing, I'm actually struggling with the opposite thing. How much I'm too familiar with that, and it's too easy for me to kind of engage with the not talk with the students, but to say, oh, I already know this kind of things. So I'm kind of, I know, like I already experienced the type of questions. I'll just throw these things, and so I'm kind of in like in the mode of remembering rather in the mode of dialoguing. And, for me, that's the bigger problem. It's the opposite problem what Mark you were talking about. I'm no too much.
Right, and in that sense, you in a sense there's two poles there. It's either being a fear that it's moving in a direction you don't know, or fear that you're actually going to be not fully engaged in the dialogue because you have already in your head some ready-made answers that you already kind of preset ideas about where you think the dialogue's actually going to go.
And the worst part,
no surprise.
Yeah,
no surprise
for me. And the worst part is when it's working. Not when it's not working, that's easier. Because in this case, my knowledge kind of collapse and we will start. But the worst thing when it's working, yeah, indeed. Like we had that dialogue with some previous students. So in a way, I'm start repeating, and it's working in the sense that it's very interesting for my current students. But I myself in memory mode rather than in dialogue mode much. And that's interesting thing, which is again, and I'm always think, well, that's critical dialogue in this classroom, mostly not for me, but for my students. I'm here to help. Like I'm a janitor here. If it's necessary to clean the floor after something happened. I'm happy to do that because this is what I'm for. The party is not for me. I'm just supporting the party, like the festivity, the dramatic events, but I don't need to be a part of that. But this is where my struggle is, like how much I can be like that.
Because you're afraid of manipulating too much.
Well, also manipulate. On the other hand, I'm also afraid to exploit that in the sense that, like I'm thinking, oh, I'm become like my student. In this case, this is my. In this case, I'm not helping them, but I'm also struggling with my own issue. It's like part of this what Socrates struggled as well in this Mena dialogue, because his student came. Well, not student, young man, whatever. You can call him student because I think Mena positioned himself as a student. He came to Socrates and said, like, I want to know origin of virtues, right? And Socrates said, no, that's not very good question. The good question, what's virtue is? And Mena said, I don't want to discuss what virtue is. I think I know what virtue is. And I want to know what origin. And Socrates said, oh, you know what virtue is? Tell me. And Mena said, I don't want to tell you. I'm interested in what's the origin of that. So, and at some point, there was struggle between them for some time. But at some point, Socrates suddenly said, oh, you came to me. I didn't come to you. It means I should follow your inquiry, not mine. You know, when the students bringing their own inquiries, they're all legitimate, but if I start bringing mine, that's become a question for me. How much I have a right to do that?
But on the other hand, sometimes the student's position and what their interest is, and yours as their teacher, have to be negotiated to something third, because you may say, just like Socrates, like
No,
your question is interesting, but I cannot answer it post.
No, it's not like that. Socrates, there is no negotiation. That's the point. Socrates did not negotiate anything. He surrendered.
Yeah, I would say it should be negotiated.
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's not negotiation between what I want and what they want. In my view, I just need to follow what they want and accept that. And if I cannot do something, well, in this case, I just cannot help with something, which is I have limits on my own, but that's it. It's not about negotiating.
Right.
They negotiate with each other, but not with me. I should be out of this negotiation things. They negotiate with each other because they see that some inquiries or some themes or some tensions become very important for one person, but not necessarily for another. But they kind of, so far in that class particular, so far, they're willing to engage and support each other, or just listen and learn from that themselves, or just listen, or maybe even think about whatever they want to think during this moment. But I don't think I have a right to negotiate with them. Like, why my inquiry is important? My inquiry is important with you right now. And I'm negotiating with you right now because you're my colleagues. I'm not teaching you, and you're not my students. That's fine. But with my students, I cannot do that. I think it's illegitimate. And
well, yeah, it would be an authoritative voice that would maybe be unquestioned at some point, and then would kill the dialogue.
No, not only that. Imagine again, patient come to the doctor, and doctor said, "You know what? I have also problem. Let us focus on my problem. Why we talk about your problem, health problem? I have also health problem."
It's hijacking the agenda. Hijack the agenda.
Exactly. In this case, it's illegitimate.
Uh-huh.
That's not about authoritarian, because right now we can do that. We negotiate, and like something interesting for Mark may be not interesting for Ljubica, or something interesting for Anna may be not interesting for Eugene, and so on and so forth. But we have to negotiate that. In my view, when you are a teacher, there is nothing to negotiate. The students came with this kind of thing. Like the students bring with this their kind of inquiries, their interest, and my job is to support that, to problematize that, whatever I have to do, but not to say, you know what, I have different inquiry for, which is very interesting for me. What you actually saying that it's maybe, it's okay, but it's not very interesting for me.
You know, this is something I always wanted to talk about, and this is a good place to do it, right?
Exactly. By the way, I have these interesting things.
Yeah.
You're not interested in that, that's fine, but let's still meet. we talked about your things, it's enough. Let's talk about my stuff.
Or even better, well, I mean, this is probably more likely. Hey, now this is something we're supposed to cover in this class.
Right.
And it comes to this point, and you know, and so people can maybe delude themselves into thinking that, wow, my students are so motivated to discuss topic Y because they came up with it before class, but not so sure, right? You know, it's kind of, I think this is coming up to the point of what the difference is between a provocation and a curricular endpoint. We have to be really careful of distinguishing the two.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're not talking about endpoint because I think critical dialogue is very much antithetical to the idea of curriculum endpoint. Mm-hmm. As soon as you start doing endpoint, and that, by the way, very important, specifically in the area of social justice and critical pedagogy, because they immediately see that endpoints of the justice endpoints, like fighting racism, fighting sexism, fighting this and fighting that. And I'm nothing against fighting, but what is fighting these kind of bad things, but what is anything to do with education? And by the way, on the other hand, it's true that sometimes education should stop and other things has to be started. And education is not always important there is a situation of urgency. Like, for example, if there is a fire happened in the classroom, we should stop and run away rather than, oh, this is interesting, we can study about fires. Like, this is interesting emerging topic. Why don't we study fires? Right? Let's continue sitting. Probably fire people will come. Firefighters will come and do that. It's not our business.
Well, they'll probably arrest the teacher for endangering the students.
Exactly. Because, by the way, and why? Because the teacher did not prioritize safety of the students over the education.
Right.
You know, sometimes education is not as important as something else. That's why it's okay. It's fine, like fighting racism and sexism and many other bad things, very important, and education has to be stopped and fighting should start. But it should be very clear, understood that fighting racism and all these bad things, not necessarily to do much with education itself. And that's the problem. Because education is not about making things good, in my view. And critical dialogue is not about making life good. It's part of the life. It's just like, what justification of the critical dialogue? It's just like because it's existential part of human life. It's not because it's good for something else. Sometimes it can be good for something else. Sometimes it can be bad for something else. But it is the most important part that it's part of existential part of the life. It's the same like answer for, in my view, for the art. Why art? What justification for art? For me, it's only existential. Art is good because people involved in the art, or at least many people like to involve in the art. And when they don't involve in the art one way or another, they feel there's something missing, very important part missing in their life. And this is only justification. Yes, it's true. Maybe it's true. I don't know how much it's true or not, that art can help increase math test scores, as some people argue. Maybe it's true. But maybe not. It's also true that sometimes art can be very destructive and can be very traumatic for some people, also true. But neither one or another things makes, in my view, either justifies art or undermines art. The most important thing that art is existential thing. By the way, I think it's part of the true for the science. Science has huge instrumental aspect, but there is some intrinsic part of the science as well. Science is good just because It's
find out.
human life. Hmm?
Just because you're curious to find out about that.
Yeah, and in my view, people much more involved in science than they even think themselves about that, both as a production of the science and consumption, but that's another story. But that's very important about this, especially in the so-called critical pedagogy, when they see endpoints. Like Paulo Freire, in my view, I'm pointing at him, and it's for me, it's very clear that he has endpoints of his critical pedagogy, which specifically was seen in his work in Africa. It's much less visible in his work in Brazil, at least in his writing, but very clear in his work when he was under totalitarian communist regime. And where is this criticality? Everything disappeared. What they study is slogan of Communist Party, and not in critical way at all. Just like it's like brainwashing of the peasants with communist propaganda. And he's absolutely, meaning Paulo Freire, unapologetic of that. And for me, this is where
right.
become very clear.
It's also important to talk about the justifications of that type of policy on the fact that the regime would be helping to make the peasants more literate.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is also something that, I know that, the field of language studies suffers from is the minute that you have the goal of your course to have students become more language proficient, you're creating a filter, right, which is in a way allowing blocking or certain types of discourse from being legitimate and other types being not legitimate. And I had some struggle with that in that field because I felt as if there's a couple of there's another side to this issue which I think we might have, and it's coming to my mind as I'm thinking about language pedagogy, and that is the market for education. When students come into the classroom expecting you to sort of, in a way, provide them with a bank of skills or knowledge in an efficient way in order to get through the course as efficiently as possible so that they can, for example, improve their skills in their job or get through their graduate program more quickly. There's a lot of teachers who are, I was struggling with the idea of any role of critical dialogue in an institution that is solely focused on this consumerism of trying to get people through the education as efficiently as possible. 8-week sessions, for example, twice an hour, twice a day, and then you've got this kind of regime imposed on you that is creating a set of preset expectations where by the end of this course students will be able to, and it's a list that you couldn't possibly guarantee every student in that course would ever match these objectives, but you have to pretend that they do. It's this kind of like game that a lot of teachers have to play, and it leaves a sour taste in your mouth about the role of critical dialogue, in large part because it belies the notion of efficiency.
In my view, what you touch upon, what I see you touch upon, is Mark, is competing ideas what education is.
Sure.
And from what you're talking about, I hear two more ideas about that, or maybe more. I hear that, so maybe it's my ear. So one idea, of course, what we're talking about, education as a critical dialogue. But another type of idea, especially in the language, where we're talking about education in the language curriculum, is about what can be called authorial socialization. That's another idea. It's like basically when the kids learn to talk, they not engage in deconstruction of the language necessarily or many other ideas. It's just they learn how to be authors in that language that recognized, and their authorship is recognized in the linguistic community in which they socializing. That's one thing. And another idea, which is you talk about at the end, in my view, it's instrumental idea of education as an instrument for particular skills and knowledges, very well defined, pre-packed, and it's about more about whether or not they talk about that or not. It's about transmission of certain knowledge and skills to the students, and they, you know, in advance. As you said, at the beginning of the lesson, at the end of the lesson, they have to know this, this, and this, and that. And you know what they need to learn. And this is, in my view, exactly indication that's of this instrumentality. So this is a competing idea of education. Some people say it's not education, it's training. It's like a dog training in the circus. You know, you show these two fingers and they bark twice. You show another time, they bark twice, and you put plus there, and they bark 4 times, you know. And you can do it with animals through reinforcement, basically from pattern recognition. It's like what we have Alexa or Siri is doing in rather sophisticated way. And doing pattern recognition, well, some people say, well, it's possible to do in conceptual way as well. Conceptual pattern recognition in a way. And so this is what kind of that training or instrumental learning, instrumental education is about. So I think it's interesting to consider this at least 3 definitions of what education is about. And they really competing with each other, they disagreeing with each other. Some people say, well, maybe we should combine them together. But definitely there is view on that. And some people desire differently. Some people don't want to have critical dialogue whatsoever as part of their education. They want to have you know, when you ask how this remote control works, you don't want to deconstruct and ask what makes it when I press this button, how that device communicates with my TV. Like whether or not you don't want to deconstruct. You just say, oh, Eugene, it's very simple. This is a button. If you click that, the TV starts. Okay, and so on and so forth. And they also call it education, which is nothing to do with critical dialogue at all.
Right.
Deconstruction.
Maybe, you know, we may all have in our lives areas where we personally want education and other areas where we personally just want a pattern that will make us be good users of whatever we need to use.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question whether or not we should just exclude this. It's kind of legitimate, but we should exclude that from the calling it education. That's one solution. Or we should be pluralistic about education and just say, well, education has many meanings.
Pluralistic. Jelda Ljubica. She would say pluralistic. That's her value. Pluralistic. I think. Am I guessing right? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
I think we need to be pluralistic. It comes not only, it really comes from dialogism. If you're there to serve your student, as you say, then your student should decide what they want. And
but that's maybe true, but it doesn't exclude that pluralism. What you're talking about, I'm talking about different pluralism. I'm talking about pluralism, conceptual pluralism. You're talking about pluralism of practice, which is, so for example, the fact that I'm voting Democrat does not preclude me to be pluralistic in terms of that I don't want Republicans to be disappeared or sent to another planet and clearing from, this is different. At the same time, I don't want to say that, well, because of pluralism, I should be Republican as well. I should combine my democratic values with Republican values. And this is what I'm talking about. When I said pluralistic, when I mean it, I mean combining this, which is what is some kind of eclectic view of this. So to accept that there are many different definitions of education, all of them legitimate, all of them fine, and all of them I want to do. No, I don't want like that.
Yeah.
I'm a particular teacher, and I'm not very much interested in instrumental education. Authorial socialization, yeah, it's more interesting for me, but that's not me either. I'm in critical dialogue. This is me. And it's fine that somebody said, well, I don't want that. Okay, goodbye. It means goodbye. But it doesn't mean that I will start combining things.
Yeah, no. It really, I don't think it can be combined. You know, I think it's good to point out these distinctions because at a fundamental level, with this consumer-driven model of education, and particularly with the number of educational institutions that are out there promising students X amount of knowledge or expertise in X amount of weeks, it doesn't lend itself, it violates so many principles of critical dialogue that I just don't see any compatibility whatsoever. It's difficult, and there's one more form of education that's out there, which I think a lot of people forget, that we have a lot of educational institutions that are out there where the goal is simply to pass through, which we have that one as well. Education as a pass-through, almost like a gatekeeper. And I don't know, like, you know, that's interesting more from the point of view of the degree to which a critical dialogue may be possible there. More likely there than in some of these other institutions where, of course, most of them are probably a combination of two. And a lot of teachers that think they're teaching authorial socialization are actually, in my view, really teaching students that want to pass through the system. And they buy into this authorial socialization as a way of kind of following through and getting from where they need to go. Because, you know, it's questionable to what degree you can really socialize in a practice, arguably, without dialoguing within that practice. You know, because we have this tendency in education, right, to sort of say, okay, you're learning right now, so you're not really at the stage yet where you can really engage with this. So what we're going to do is teach you the concepts and skills that are going to allow you to do that later on, as if somehow the world right now isn't filled with the exact issue that you're trying to describe. And I don't know, I taught in the authorial socialization realm for a while, and it's painful because you want to go places, you want to do things, you want to discuss things, you want to diet, you want to hear what the students think about things, but deep down you realize that nobody's actually there to think. They're not there to engage in concepts. They're not there to really explore what anything means to them. The goal is simply, arguably, I can't see it any other way, and I have a hard time figuring out what other people see there other than a hoop that you're trying to get through. And it could be pleasant at times. It could be that people really have, but I found too many, at least from my view, too many ethical, moral issues that just knotted my stomach up, that I couldn't get myself to stay there anymore in that type of teaching environment.
Yes, but
it's difficult. Mm-hmm. For me, it might be easy for somebody else who sees that potentially as a value in itself. Me, I have a hard time separating what students are learning from the practice in which they're engaging. But for other people, they may see a complete distinction between the practice I'm joining and the practice I am learning. I just have a hard time make that distinction.
Yeah, what you described, Mark, for me at least, it's not authorial socialization whatsoever, because authorial socialization starts with inviting students' authorship. And you cannot, this is the beginning, you cannot tell them, well, we've learned something and later you will apply that. That's already not authorial socialization.
I understand.
You have to be author here and now, and the idea is like forming that authorship. Like, for example, let's start thinking about little kids who learn how to speak. Nobody put them, okay, let's do blah, 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 and later you will apply these sounds when you talk.
Right, that's,
no,
doesn't work.
Like that. Right. The kids try to talk, you try to respond to that, right, in this particular situation with particular things. And this is how their authorship is primary there, because they want something, or you want something to communicate to them as well as adult. And this is what whole things happen. Nobody, we are thrown in the situation of authorship from the beginning. And this is where authorial socialization starts. Like many people, especially in arts, they're doing that pretty well, in my view. Of course, they also can do this instrumental education, like, okay, we're doing this elements, and then later on we will combine them and it will be something else. Then you will be author. Right now you're not an author. You're learning how to do these elements. That's not authorial, of course.
Yeah, that in various arts you can create teaching like that, like in ballet schools where you first the first position, the second position.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Or elements of acting or something like that before you, or you can create the whole learning in the arts as authorship in itself, and then the skills will come when they're needed.
Yeah, but there is a very strong in art education, a strong, like, I don't know how to call it, approach and movement to focus on this authorship from the day one and continue for authorship, for authorial socialization from the day one. And there is no instrumental part. I mean, there is, of course, instrumental aspect of these things, but it's only aspect.
Authorship is
technique and stuff like that. But in the spirit of that is like authorship. Let me give one example so it will not be in abstract way in art education. There was a wonderful teacher who came to visit us, Jan Zajka. Mark, you probably remember him, from Slovakia.
Yeah.
He's still working with Roma kids. And I actually asked him exactly that, like how you work with, like, tell me on day one, you can, the little kids come to you. He learned a little bit to speak Roma language as well, because the kids couldn't speak Slovak. I said, how it's happened? Like, tell me. And he said, well, I just asked them. I assume that they are already very observant artists. They might not draw things yet, but they're already very observant. So I asked them how to draw face. And they're very knowledgeable. They start telling me, like, face, there are eyes, for example. And he put, and he said, how many? And he said, they said, the little kids, which is 6, 7 years old, they say 2. And he put them vertically. And so they tell them, and they start laughing and say, no, not that way. I said, which way? And they direct him in a way how to try to draw a face. And he tried to be non-cooperative, creatively non-cooperative with them, because he wants them to see that it's not, he in a way deconstructs in a way part of that. It's the construction of their idea of topology and place and this and that. But it's coming from the all views an artist from the day one. Okay, and so he creates very funny faces, of course, very interesting in themselves, and the kids laugh about that, and they correct him. He's so wrong, but this is again their authorship of the kids' authorship, artistic authorship, was invited from day one. Okay, and actually I asked him how much, because for me it was one of the interesting things was how he guides them there is a lot of deformities in things like, for example, the kids might draw hands out of the neck, right, of the person next. And I said, so when you see that it's like a suggestion, like, how do you know that it's mistake or it may be artistic style like that? And he said that this is a big problem for him because he doesn't want to like make kids to become artists like him or visions like him. So there is a lot of negotiation that's happening, and he's testing that. Is it their intention? Is it artistic intention? Or they actually frustrating themselves because they see something wrong, but they don't know how to fix that? Or is it part of that? Because there is a lot of, well, one of the exciting things to see the pictures of his kids and how many innovations they do that. They just with perspective, with many other things.
Right, right.
And it's part of their artistic universe rather than, but from other point of view, it's a mistake. Like, for example, there is a wonderful picture of one girl draw her kind of new family. She has a sister, newborn sister. And on that picture, there's a huge baby drawn. And little other people, like herself and her mother. And this little baby, the fact that it's disproportionately big, reflects kind of the attention that the baby has now in the family. But from the point of view of proportions, it's so wrong. The baby is smaller, of course. Her mother should be bigger, and she should be much bigger than her sister, but smaller than her mother. But it's not like that. And the fact that the teacher recognized, for me it was interesting, that teacher recognized the authorship of the child. Mm-hmm. It's not a mistake. It's artistic vision. And so I asked him how he kind of recognized new artistic vision, and he said it's not easy. I talk with the kids, I negotiate like how you see that, like what you excited about this picture and what you think something requires more working. And from hearing that, I said, aha, this is where I can help. And I should help by emphasizing that. This is a new exciting idea in drawing. Just that one example in artistic kind of vision. And for me, that authorship is the primary invitation in that class. Some of that is critical and some socialization. Like, for example, he invited and showed a picture of Picasso, and the kids immediately jump on that as a material to transcend. Those who who got excited, so they kind of created like a Roma cubism from kind of based on Picasso.
I would like to suggest that we add another topic: the relationship between critical examination and authorship, authorial way of approaching education. As the next topic, because we are here 1.5 hours.
Okay, yeah, we need to.
I think that conclude because we went out of our critical dialogue.
In a way, yes. In a way, no. I mean, I think people can confuse it with authorship. I think that's a good topic.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not to stay on the topic. This is very interesting, but I just think for this podcast. Yeah.
So who is going to summarize what we talked about? To be productive.
Maybe we can have an exit survey
right.
where we, and we talk about how we feel and before and after.
Okay.
Or what was most exciting things or disturbing things that we learn or talk. Yeah, okay, well, hope to see, it's nice to see you, Ljubica, Anna, and Mark. And
yes, good to see you too.
Next time.
Thank you for this possibility to listen to you. Next time.
Okay.
I hope I will enter in your dialogic discussion.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Ljubica and I will continue
It was
that
very, very
discussion
interesting for me.
in a having coffee somewhere in Belgrade with another person from our little kruzhok or circle. So we will continue on our own.
It's a bit difficult for me to.
Okay, understood.
Because I'm not so. My English is really.
It's fine.
But listening is
Good. As long as we are
I
interested.
hope I didn't disturb you.
No.
Or you did it in a very important way.
Yeah.
Productive disturbance.
Productive disturbance.
Yes.
Very critical.
Okay.
All right.
I hope you have a great evening. Go and see some nice movie for me.
Okay. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. And thank you.
Bye.
Bye.